hybrid. Yeah. The hybrid. Yeah. The hybrid. Yeah. The hybrid.
Do you know the feeling when you're building a fire truck on the way to the fire? I used to say that all the time in Massachusetts. It drove my communications team absolutely crazy. But here's the thing. It's exactly what regulating cannabis felt like. We were racing to catch up with an industry that was exploding faster than we could write the rules. Some fires were accidents. Some were arson. And sometimes the arsonists were inside the house, lighting matches while we were trying to save the place. Every regulator has stories like that. The chaos behind the scenes, the licensees who thought they knew better than the law, politicians pulling strings when you're just trying to do your job. The public expected miracles when you're working with duct tape and good intentions. We all have our highlight reels and, our blooper reels. The slip-ups that almost went public, the wins that actually moved the needle, but of course nobody noticed. And when the smoke clears, literally and figuratively, hopefully we are remembered for the highlights. So today, on the hybrid, we're going to talk about the dilemma of being a regulator, the policy, the politics, and the public expectations. We're going to dig deep into that impossible balancing act, the tug of war that defined our days leading cannabis programs. Headlines that expose just how wild all of this could get. Some stories from the trenches. They might be funny. They could be brutal. And they're all true. And we'll close, as we always do, with trivia to see who's actually been paying attention, which means, Erik, I hope you've at least prepared a question.
I got a question.
That's good to know. I'm sure I know the answer. Welcome back, everybody, to The Hybrid. If you're just finding us, pull up a chair. I'm Shawn Collins. I'm here with my co-host, Erik Gundersen, and we were the regulators of the Massachusetts and Maine cannabis programs, respectively. We're two ex-regulators who have seen this world from the inside. We're not here to preach. We're not here to spin. We're here to tell you what it's really like. The unfiltered truth about policy and politics and everything in between. Think of it like this. We're the guys who lived through the highs and the lows, and now we're going to have a conversation that we wished we could always have over drinks. Except I don't have a drink. No corporate speak, no political theater, just substance. And again, maybe some humor. Whether you're in the trenches yourself, if you might be running a business, or maybe you're just curious about the behind-the-scenes stuff, this is your dose of reality. We're going to start like we usually do with the policy pulse. So Erik and I are going to get real about what it's actually like being the person in the hot seat, trying to write policy while politicians breathe down your neck and the public, again, expects perfection. And we'll talk about some of the invisible victories, stopping a scandal or something before it even hits the news. The gut punch decisions that still might keep us up at night. Is regulator independence in cannabis possible? Or is it just a nice idea that sometimes gets steamrolled by politics? And in a world where everything gets reduced to sound bites, how do you explain complexity without getting eaten alive? We've got stories about moments when politics absolutely trumped good policy, times when public pressure forced us into corners that we might have never seen coming, this raw, unvarnished tale from two of us that were actually there. And then we'll dive into some headlines. You might have seen what's going on in New York with their licensing mess and got everybody pointing fingers across the city and across the state. Florida's adult use ballot push for 2026. Stop me if you've heard that one before. And the Safe Banking Act. Maybe you've heard of it. It's back again. Maybe it's not. Time will tell. It's kind of a cruel joke at this point. We'll cut through all that spin with takes that don't necessarily pull punches. Because if there's one thing we learned is that the truth usually gets buried under layers of political theater. And then we'll reflect. Some of the head-scratching, maybe bizarre stories we've got from our time, the human stories that never make it into official reports. They may not make the meeting minutes, but they basically defined our jobs. You'll laugh, we might cringe, And hopefully you'll nod in recognition and maybe appreciation. And then we'll close with trivia. Because like I said, Erik usually doesn't have a question. If he does, it's probably not a good one. I, on the other hand, have a stumper. Is that even a word? So I'll probably keep the crown. And again, this is stuff you don't want to miss. So I guess grab your headphones, maybe pour a coffee or whatever gets you going, and we'll start diving into episode 5 of The Hybrid. It's candid, it's clever, and we think it's been a long time coming. So, Erik, with that, welcome back. Good to see you. Hopefully you've had a good summer. But what do you got? Let's dig into your time running the cannabis program in Vacation Land. And I mentioned earlier those small victories that I used to say to our staff all the time, we never take the victory laps. We deprive ourselves of that. And every day I felt like something was going right. We just spent too much time talking about what went wrong or what was potentially about to go catastrophically wrong. So what were some of the maybe the victory laps you wish you could take? Or if you could do it over again, you might pat yourself on the back.
Yeah. Well, first, I don't want to brush past your analogy of building the fire truck on the way to the fire. I've actually never heard it. I'm pretty sure like 10 out of 10 listeners are thinking in their head, isn't that building the airplane while flying it? But that's just me. That's just special Massachusetts exceptionalism, building the fire truck on the way to the fire.
Building the airplane on the way to the fire. Yeah, we're building the fire truck on the way to the airport.
No, I mean, you bring up a good point about the small victories.
I usually do, yeah.
About the small victories and looking back and reflecting on my time and our time and wishing we had taken a step back and taken a deep breath and been like, you know what, good job. Because when you're talking about small victories, like the biggest victory of the office in Maine during my time, when I reflect on it, was like a small victory. At least that's the way that we had treated it, which was launching the entire adult use program during a global health pandemic. And I remember the day that we had the first day of legal sales. I think we had like 6 or 7 dispensaries open, against all against all COVID protocols. I had my leadership team in my office, feet up on the desk, taking reports from the field and just kind of taking a deep breath after the year's worth of work, hair on fire, working extremely fast, like 20 people doing the job of 100, and just really soaking it all in. And more of it was than a tap on the back or like an attaboy, was just a sigh of relief that we had finally made it. And everything went off without a hitch. I mean, there was obviously all the newspapers were like, hey, first day of legal sales, but I don't remember getting calls of congratulations. I don't remember getting text messages. I don't remember any visitors coming by. I'm sure I did at the time, but talking about
I think I texted.
You may have, but when
it sounds like something I would do.
When you're talking about small victories, the reason it felt like a small victory at the time is because the very next day, I mean, we didn't have a party, we didn't have cake, we didn't have pizza, we didn't go out bowling and celebrate. Yeah, well, that was one reason. But like the very next day, we went back to work. Like, what's the next thing that we need to do? What's around the corner? What do we need to be prepared for? So to answer your question, looking back, like that is one thing I wish we had spent a little bit more time celebrating. Because as you know, the amount of work and what you're asking of your staff in those 12 months or 6 months or whatever it may be leading up to that point is like asking a lot. Like you're not working a typical 40-hour week state employee stuff. Like you're working long hours, you're trying to solve incredibly complicated problems. And I know I thanked my staff and I was always looking out for them and making sure they felt appreciated. But of course, looking back, I wish I could have done more for them too, because like this stuff doesn't happen in a silo. Like there was a small group of individuals that joined me in making that happen. So, I mean, yeah.
But I think there's like this now, there's this network of, I think you and I are examples, but I think then you start to zoom in more carefully and it's like you have your team in Maine. I've got my folks in Massachusetts that like we are forever connected as a network of, we live the shared experience, and it's like an inside joke in a way. Like it's sort of like our inside lingo of like, we were there, we know, we have the backstory to that. And I think there's a few examples. Obviously, we have a similar story in Massachusetts of like rolling things out. But to get even more granular with the example, like I remember being a ball of nerves on, it was April 1st. I want to say it was 2018, which is by law, we had to roll out applications by that date. And I was adamant when I got appointed that we will not have paper applications. Like, we are a brand new agency. This is the 21st century. We need to have a digital application portal that will be easy to navigate, that'll be intuitive. And here that was like an October interview before the April debt. So like, you could do the math. Like, we didn't have a ton of time. We had no procurement, no money, all those things. And I remember thinking, like, we can do this. We can totally do this. I didn't have a chief technology officer. I didn't have a vendor. And April 1st, the day before, we're sort of stress testing this platform. We rolled out an application. We sort of managed the application internally, and it was still a handful of staff. And I remember literally looking over the CTO's shoulder, who was sitting not in a cubicle, but at like a makeshift desk, and saying, like, here goes nothing. And it was so anticlimactic. It was like the click of a mouse, like, yep, we're live. And it was like, all right, like, what are you going to do for lunch? And we also like locked that system down so tightly that like the only folks that could actually access the applications on the inside, like the back end, was at like a single or two IP addresses. And it was like, we were concerned about the Russians and like some sort of like nefarious actor, like stress testing or like hammering our system. Then I was like, heading into the weekend, I'm like, I kind of want to check the application activity on, from home if I can. It was like, your IP address at home is not approved. It's like, okay, well then approve it. Nah, it's too risky. And it's obviously, to your point, like flash forward to COVID, it's like whitelist everybody at home because we're all working from home these days. But that rolling out that application could have gone completely sideways. And you think about all these like government programs, like, I don't know if you remember a few years back when like the health connector and like the Obamacare application stuff, where like every state was suffering from just failed rollouts of tech platforms.
That was like perfect timing for us because we just lived through that. So when hitting go, you're like, oh God, how bad can this go? And real quickly, like, I think people listening are like, oh my God, how, like, talking about turning on a licensing portal. You need to remember, it was 7 or 8 years ago. So there's no like off the shelf cannabis licensing. The amount of work and boring, terrible technical meetings going through and building out licensing systems for this stuff is complicated. I hated it. But just so the listeners understand, like, these are massive projects 8 years ago when we did it.
I think for context too, it's a great point. Like, there's sort of like inside baseball here. These are potentially like millions of dollars worth of application, like platforms, like software vendors, etc. But also, imagine being on the receiving end, like the user side of, you are a prospective cannabis licensee and you log into this portal for the first time. You're asked to give your email address and your password. You're being asked to upload your social security number potentially. You're being asked to upload all these different, like dozens and dozens of PDFs or other documents. Like, you are putting your life's work, like your dream, into this platform. You have some expectations that, one, it's going to function. At the very least, it's going to function. But more than that, that it's a secure platform that's not going to be, there's at least protections around there. Like, same thing with like patient portals. Like, these are people, like, that's healthcare info. It's not HIPAA because of the federal dynamic, but it might as well be, it should be treated as HIPAA. And on the back end, you've got, again, like, if the public could sort of just be, if we lived in a fishbowl, and at times it felt like we did, but to know that like it's sort of two guys standing over like a makeshift desk going like, yeah, I guess we're live. Yep, there it is. I did it. Like,
click.
That's not going to breed confidence necessarily. And again, like the cold sweats of like, like we're live. And I remember saying to commissioners back when we launched our program, it was like Black Friday in 2018. And it was like, we're live, like stores are open. And we were proud of the fact that Metric was live and functioning. We had test results. We could see them. We could see all traceability. Everybody was licensed. Everyone was like with final license or no provisionals. We didn't have to go back and fix anything necessarily. It wasn't like this is a temporary process. But I remember saying to them, like, it's out of our hands now. Like, we've regulated this thing. We've set our expectations. Our rules are in place. If people don't follow them, we'll enforce them. But if our rules are off, if we forgot something, if we overlooked something, like, we're live. We're dealing with a controlled substance being available for commercial sale. Here goes nothing. And the worst critique was parking.
Yeah.
Which was not my problem. Like,
it is nerve-wracking because you bring up a good point. Like, this is well, at the beginning, maybe not so much, but we're talking about at least in Maine, a $400 million industry statewide. And I know it's so cute, but I mean, you went through it, like the licensing, the inventory tracking, the testing, like those are all individual work streams that took massive amount of work and massive amount of planning. And if one thing goes wrong, it can domino. So I'm thankful to my lucky stars that, well, both of us had successful launches and there was no catastrophe and everything went smooth. But yeah, I think, yeah, to your point, like there's a lot to be proud of and celebrate in those moments.
I'm glad you referenced though, because I think what you and I both recognize and acknowledge, but I think it's worth specifically calling out, is neither one of us did anything alone. We were lucky to have the dedicated staff and teams that we did that gave us way more than their standard issue 37 and a half hours a week. And we're committed to seeing it through, but also committed to going to work the next day. Like, there was never a finish line. We never crossed a finish line. And we were like, all right, our work here is done. Like, see you guys later. Because we knew that the next day there was another license type to consider. There was another regulatory element to review or take a look at. Like, the reason I think we never celebrated some of the small victories or the big ones was kind of because we knew that there was more work to be done. And I just want to sort of pause to just acknowledge and admit that, like, while we might have taken the shots publicly and sort of stood in the public role and capacity, it was on behalf of a growing number of staff too, because we were still hiring at all those times. We were still building our agency in the background. But a lot of folks contributed to that. And I'd also want to compliment, I think, the industry in Mass and respectively in Maine as well. Of, like, the reason some of these things were a success is because they also complied and they worked alongside us to make sure they were ready for rollout too. So no one did anything alone, and certainly don't interpret, my small victory example as being taking credit. Quite the opposite. It's sort of a proud recognition of sort of the folks that I worked alongside, and I'm sure you feel the same way.
Yeah. Well, yeah, absolutely. But you bring up another good point, Shawn. You're on a roll today. When you're talking, well,
I got a good night's sleep, so that helps. Yeah.
Yeah. But even in your, to take a step back from us, like living our glory days in the fun times, the fast pace, at least in my experience in Maine, and I'd be interested to see if you had the same experience in Massachusetts, why that was the fun time. And while it was the busiest, it was probably the easiest for me because the legislature gave us space to do what we needed to do to get the thing up and running. They took our feedback when
What's
they
that
were
like?
Yeah, they took our feedback. They took our suggestions around passing new legislation while we were trying to put the industry together. The industry gave us space to get all the systems in place to be able to get to that day, to where we made applications live, to where we launched. But quickly thereafter is where the politics started getting messy. You're talking about what's good policy. How can we have the best program possible moving forward from a public health and safety perspective? How can we make it as competitive as possible, understanding like the economics in these state siloed markets don't work. And politics is always the worst enemy of good policy. And that's when things changed for me, was after launch. And then we started to fine tune things and kind of look at our medical program. And that's when the politics got a little bit messy. Don't get me wrong. We did ride a wave of like, all right, we launched, we were coming off a huge win. Like, we delivered on what was promised to be delivered when we established the office. But after that, when you start trying to fine tune and tinker, and in my case, align two completely different cannabis programs, is when the politics got in the way of good policy, and when a lot of the real headaches started, and a lot of the not so fun moments happened.
It's a good pivot. And I think it's because it's true. There was always, and I used to always remind myself, but also our team, like, keep in mind that not everybody is rooting for you either, right? Like, ours was a popular ballot question that was, I think, 53-47 or 53-46, somewhere in that range, which was like, there are skeptics out there that are not rooting for our success. It doesn't mean they're rooting for failure per se, because that would be, I think, catastrophic for everybody. But it doesn't mean they're looking for you to be like banner sales day and, like, records broken, although that seems to be a generic press release that gets issued yearly around these parts. But the point being that there is not this wave behind us, like, sort of, we're not implementing an issue that is not inherently political itself. And with that in mind, like, we owe them a responsibility to demonstrate our maturity, to demonstrate our comprehensiveness. And so I think we tried to balance that a lot as well. But yeah, once we implemented, and even before, I mean, I think even applications and the way we managed our applications as far as managing the queue, like, all that stuff, it was like there wasn't like a honeymoon phase afterward. And even the run up to it, where all of a sudden, like, why is it taking us long to process applications? Stores are already open and we're missing those important sales. And, so being the first mover was an actual advantage. Of course it is. It's, and the longer that it takes to get the next store open, the longer you're going to hear about lines and traffic and congestion. And we were also the first East Coast island to launch. So we had a lot of folks coming from Maine, New Hampshire, New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, etc., which is still happening to some degree, just given proximity. But yeah, I think the politics, especially around application processing, but then really once we started to flex some enforcement muscle, is when I started to feel the political pressure a little bit. And having come from, my history has been in politics. I worked in the state legislature. I worked in the state treasurer's office. So I sort of at least understood and appreciated the politics of things. I actually think my time in the treasurer's office was valuable for a number of reasons, because it allowed me to experience the political side on the bureaucratic level. So working in the legislature, I was the one making those calls. I was the one saying, hey, I've got this constituent that called. What's the story? Now, both in Treasury as well as the Cannabis Commission, I was getting those calls of the elected official calling saying, my constituent's upset. Why is their application taking so long? The expectation on that call was move them along in the process. My reaction was, from an agency standpoint, our integrity and our credibility publicly is that the queue is the queue. However you landed in that queue is how you will be processed. Nobody cuts the line. My challenge to our staff was that needs to be a true statement, because the entire system is built upon public trust, and the trust needs to be, if Erik, you filed your application 5 minutes before I filed mine, your application will be reviewed first. If I were able to make that call and leverage that process to move it, to skip ahead of you, you would have every right to be both bullshit and pissed off. But now everything we do is going to have sort of a cloud to it of what's motivating that. So I held very, very firm. And it took a while to actually start to pay the political consequences of that, where all of a sudden I've got an upset member of the legislature who's saying, I think you need to be investigated. I think that your system is taking too long. I want a review. I want an audit of your agency. And it's like, okay. And again, like, we've got nothing to hide. So not to be arrogant, but like, bring it on. And also, if someone's going to come in and review our agency and offer suggestions for improvement, why wouldn't we be open-minded to that? We didn't get everything right. I'll be the first one to admit it, but that started, I think, the enforcement piece, especially because in fairness, you talk about enforcement, like, you're dealing with someone's livelihood, you're dealing with their business, there's financial implications, there's delays. Delay is a financial implication. So, like, I get it, but yeah, the politics piece is something we tried to avoid, but doing so, I think, actually in and of itself was political.
Yeah, I mean, Shawn, I'm sorry that you didn't have a honeymoon period, because I think we did. I don't remember getting those types of phone calls from legislators around.
I accept your apology, by the way. I
the
appreciate it.
application
It was a long time
process.
coming. Yeah.
Like I was saying earlier, like we had the space to do that. And then we got to launch. I'm sure there was some of that stuff, but I may have blacked it out, or I'm just not remembering. Our issues came.
That sounds like trauma. Are you okay?
Yeah, no, we'll get to my actual trauma. You know, my actual trauma. No, but even like the enforcement action, I mean, we issued our first fine like the second day after we launched. There was a licensee that did something we told them not to do, and they did it anyway. We took our action, and I think it was well received. Like we were doing our job. Like they understood why we were there. I don't remember getting a lot of political heat around taking enforcement actions. I got the political heat from following state law. And I say that with like confidence. No, seriously, in the Maine Legalization Act, it was like, basically, I'll dumb this down quite a bit, but it was like, listen, after you launch the adult use program, circle back and align the medical program, institute tracking, institute testing. So we're like, all right, that makes a lot of sense.
You have a lot of nerve.
Yeah, you got a lot. Yeah. So as soon as we started that effort and started moving in that direction, quite frankly, like shit just hit the fan and went nuts. That's when the politics got really messy. There were like lines divided. I worked in the legislature for 10 years before taking this job. I had friends that wouldn't look at me. It was really an uncomfortable time, an uncomfortable place to be. And I remember my first line of defense was like I need to do this. You guys, the legislature told me to do this. It's written right here. Like I am able to read these words on this paper. It says to align the two programs, institute tracking, institute testing. What has changed? And it turns out a lot had changed to whereas they changed the law, but I still had that black mark. Like, I can't believe you were doing this. We didn't have enough heads up. There wasn't enough stakeholder engagement. We didn't think this through enough, which maybe there's some truth to that. Like that was the first moment I realized the value of stakeholder engagement, actually having that dialogue and trying to figure out the best way to do it. But yeah, I mean, the trauma was Maine's medical program, which is still kind of a little touch and go up here. But yeah, that's where the politics got messy for me. And then it kind of bled over into the adult use side as well.
Sure. Well, I think our medical program, same but different, right? It was vertical and our adult use was not. So to your point on like rolling out the program with tracking, with licensing, part of our apprehension and or like my anxiety came from, it is a different program. It's the first time that you can wholesale inventory from a manufacturer to a retailer. It's the first time there was a standalone retailer without the benefit of having its supply chain attached to it physically and literally. And so setting those two up next to each other was not a perfect fit. It's like the two Lego blocks that just don't fit, or two puzzle pieces that don't go together.
It's oil and water.
But we still had to make it work. And the same awkwardness of that too is it's the same operators. So that one licensed facility, it's licensed under two different programs, two different regulatory regimes, two different state laws, same building. And so how does that one cultivation facility, and you and I've talked about this, we're like, it's not a medical plant or an adult use plant, but it had to be for tracking purposes, or it had to be for inventory purposes. And so the awkwardness was trying to get those two to coexist, but then also saying to industry, like, to your point, like, we're going to come back and sort of resolve this, but like, I need to breathe. Give me some time. Let me figure this out. It needs to be elegant. It needs to be legal. Maybe not in that order. It needs to be legal first. But all the same, like it needs to make sense. And I think to your point on stakeholder engagement, like you need to be part of that conversation too. But the conversation can't just be, no, we don't want to. It needs to be, how do we get where we're supposed to go? And we're not the same team. I'm your regulator, you're the licensee, and like our interests are not the same necessarily. Whereas I'm looking to ensure compliance, public health, safety, welfare. I'm sure that's a spirit of what you're doing too, but you're also a business, and that's not lost on me. But yeah, I think the two programs side by side truth be told, it's still going on. And the legislature only recently, the House of Representatives just passed a bill en masse to dismantle that vertical integration requirement on the medical side. So here we are, how many years later, it's still not resolved. And I mentioned those buildings being next to each other or the same building. Agent registration is another good example. Like, really well intentioned. If you are a licensee and you have people working for you, those folks have to be registered as an agent. Well, if you are a licensee in the adult use program and in the medical program, it's the same building, same address, same physical structure. It's still potentially 5 or 6 different licenses contained in that same building. That's 5 or 6 different agent registrations. Again, there's a administrative bureaucratic way to solve that, but it was never the front burner top priority issue.
Yeah, we saw that in Maine.
Sure. Well, again, you have a very adorable program. How's your medical program still? It's fully regulated, fully integrated?
Yeah, it's top notch. Yeah, no, I mean, you say that kind of tongue in cheek, sarcastically. Yeah, but it's still happening here in Maine. Like there's no testing, there's no tracking. It's still a statewide large cannabis program. So how do you?
But is there passion and craft and the love of plant?
Absolutely. But when we're talking about where does politics get in the way of good policy, you said it. There's no difference between a medical cannabis plant and an adult use cannabis plant. The difference is at the point of purchase. There needs to be a different experience for a consumer versus a patient. But the idea that you have these two completely different set of regulations, one is fully transparent. There's accountability. There's the ability for the state to protect the public health and safety of the general population and consumers. And that just doesn't exist on the medical side, which I think at the end of the day has hurt the medical program. They continue to get bad press up here, and it's delegitimizes the program itself, which is unfortunate because there really are so many good people in that space. It's just the smaller crowd with louder voices that really ruined it for the group. Maybe ruined is a strong word, but this is where my trauma comes from.
It's hindering, I think, that progress. And I think it's also that it erodes, I think, the spirit of collegiality and cooperation. And like, it becomes more of, like you said, a political fight versus a productive policy conversation.
Yeah, because there was never a conversation around, all right, here's the end game. How do we work together to get there? It was always just stonewalling. No, 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 no.
Yeah.
And then just me being me and my staff being my staff wanted to do the responsible thing. Because at the end of the day, it always came down to, for as corny as it sounds, like, what is the best thing for the state of Maine? Like, that's obviously to have some level of testing for medicine that these patients are using. And we heard firsthand from patients that wouldn't come out publicly because they didn't want the smoke, I guess, but like just these horror stories. And you're like, there's such an easy solution to this where we think we can make it work for everybody. But of course, it's the ones that are taking advantage of the system that fight against it the hardest, right?
And I think it's easy, and I don't mean this to be dismissive or I guess I'll say it first and then see if I step in it. But ultimately, I think it's, if I'm a politician, if I'm a legislator, I'll just use legislators as an example. And I single them out just because I think there's some sympathy in what I'm about to say. Is when they have a constituent that comes to them and says, the government is harming my business, the government is risking my business, there's an instantly sympathetic response to that. I understand that. I completely understand that. Where I think I got frustrated at times or sort of I felt as the regulator, like, give me the benefit of the doubt to at least have an explanation for you before you send me a nasty letter, before you call me and try to rip my head off, or before you issue a press release, for Christ's sake. But when they would then reach out and it's like, why are you screwing this guy over? It's like, well, we're not. And then I think the trouble sometimes is, I think you can appreciate this, is like our answers were a bit more nuanced and or technical. And if you're a legislator, like, you're dealing with, like, the very next phone call is going to be about the RMV or about, Medicare, Medicaid, or like, you've got to sort of pond hop to every single issue. You and I were living in cannabis policy. So when I say something to a legislator about, well, their testing came back beyond our action limits, we had to quarantine all their inventory, and pending further investigation and testing, it may lead to a destruction order, not from us, but from MDAR, and our Agricultural Resources Agency, which oversees and has exclusive jurisdiction over pesticides. What the legislator heard was like, oh, so bureaucracy is in the way. Like, well, then fix that. Well, no, what it means is we found pesticides on their plants and we can't let it advance in the supply chain.
Yeah, what it means is the system's still working the way that it was designed to work.
And I'm thinking to myself, like, so would you like me to release this inventory and have pesticide marinated plants on the market? Like, and also you can't remediate the pesticide. So it's not like I can say, well, move it to extraction. That's just going to concentrate the pesticide. And now it's even worse. And then I would use the sort of the horror stories of, do you know what the the chemical composition of that pesticide is when combusted versus applied topically? Because like you risk it becoming airborne cyanide, and like I'm down, not on my watch. And so I would sometimes get defensive, sure, but it was usually either on behalf of the regulatory scheme or more often than not on behalf of our staff that are doing their best to ensure public health and safety. And one thing I would tell our staff constantly, and it's, I don't really know that I fixed this might be up there with the fire truck on the way to the fire, but you always have that sort of during the holiday season, like Good Morning America, the Today Show has, these are the unsafe toys for kids this year. Like they have the table full of like also probably the most popular toys. I would tell our staff, like, we are that agency for cannabis. So in one sense, it's like that's a pretty heavy responsibility and burden to carry, but then also like look around. It's us. No one's coming to our rescue. There's no federal agency that's going to step in and be like, no, we got this. Like no one's going to big time us because we're it. Then you sort of look around and you look and like, oh shit, it's us. So like that's a heavy burden. And when I say oh shit, it's because what you don't understand or what you may not appreciate fully, you do, but like the folks listening is, we also bought our refrigerator on Amazon and we're happy when it got delivered. I had to buy the Keurig for the office with my own money. We were literally borrowing furniture from a building that was like, you can squat in as like a sublease from the gaming commission. And if you're willing, like steal their internet while you're at it. Like, so you're looking like we are like this band of misfit toys in some way, but we also have this huge burden of don't let that product get to market and get people sick. So that's where my defensive posture, I think, would come from sometimes. But yeah, I'm, back to your point about sort of the trauma. I think some of it is just like, you want to pause and sort of, I wish you could sort of zoom out and say to some of those, the political pressures, like, you don't know what we're up against entirely. Like, thank you for your support, but
it's so true.
We're drowning. Like we're drowning in responsibility, but we're also carrying that burden personally because we know what's at stake. We know we don't want to take 6 months to review an application. We just needed more staff.
Yeah. What was so frustrating about it was like when you have them come in with their, when the politics gets mixed up and you're like, the legislators are talking to you about X, Y, and Z, what they want to see, what's the issue, what's happening. I just wanted to be like, listen, if you lived in my shoes for the last 12 months and have seen what I've seen and had the conversations that I've had, I have a strong feeling that you wouldn't be saying what you're saying to me right now, which is impossible. Like that's obviously not going to happen. And we did our best from a transparency aspect to all of our stakeholder engagement to be able to show the good faith effort that we were putting into it. But yeah, like at the end of the day, I was always confident, even in the face of like controversy, that the decision that we made was right, because we go through a process, right? Like these things I felt very strongly and passionately about, and I know I went through the right process, and just trying to advocate for those things. And to your point, a lot of the times the sympathy from legislators goes to their business owners in their districts, which I have sympathy too.
Fair. Yeah, I get that.
But I get that, but I also understand, like, you're talking about sympathy for, I may be going off track here, but sympathy for these businesses. But a lot of the heat that I got from the medical program at the time where we were trying to pass rules and bring testing and bring tracking and bring some level of transparency and accountability to the system, when the legislature passed the adult use, they completely revamped like the business model of a small caregiver to where they were allowed to run brick and mortar dispensaries and sell to unlimited patients. It basically mirrored the adult use. So when you hear a business owner like that has these brick and mortar stores, that has unlimited patient population, saying, "Oh, there's just no way that we can do that," you're like, "Well, the guy across the street is basically doing the same thing, is able to do it."
Right. And suffering far more like pressure points as a
Yeah.
result.
Yeah. And going through a much more rigorous process with many more rules. Like we're talking about a scaled in testing. We're talking about tracking, because that's
Age gating, like,
yeah. So
and I think there were some lighter moments too. I think that, like, so all of this I think is really trying to illuminate sort of the environment that you and I lived in, especially in the earliest days of our respective programs, of just those pressures and trying to unpack like the experience that we had in juggling. And I also tried to insulate our staff from this as much as possible.
of course,
Where like you guys just do your job, and I will defend until I'm out of breath the work that you're doing. But then sometimes I would hang up the phone with that, that grumpy legislator, and again, completely empathetic to their experience too, trying to also inform them without, especially if like in the context of an investigation or sort of like a product, an administrative hold or quarantine, whatever it might be, knowing that like we have an administrative process that also has to unfold. And so I had 5 commissioners that were also public figures, so they're getting those phone calls. And if, let's say, it was an investigation, I've got to keep them not in the dark, but I can't bring them into the investigation such that they might be biased or prejudice their perspective, because they're supposed to be impartial. They're supposed to be the judge at some point. And if the judge is now involved in your investigation, there's a risk of bias, there's a risk of prejudice. That might mean they have to recuse themselves. So like that makes sense in a perfect world. Like as an academic exercise, that makes sense. But practically speaking, they're also in the office next door to me. And they're also, we're seeing each other in the hallway, in the elevator. They're poking their head into my office to say, what's going on? What's the latest? And so it's hard to sort of compartmentalize those things and put up those firewalls. Again, academically, sure, it makes a ton of sense. Now play it out. They also meet once a month or once every other week in public, and licensees will go up to them and say, you guys are screwing me. And again, from a sympathetic standpoint, like, I don't want to do that, but there's more to that story. The plot thickens.
yeah.
And I think with that, I tend to remember those things first, just because I think it's human nature. But there are also some like lighthearted stuff. Like we had one of our, I think she still works there. Like sent out a press release announcing, I think it was the applications, like the first sales at 4:20 p.m. Completely like an accident, like not an accident, but just like a happy accident, and was like mortified by that.
I think you've told me this story before.
As like this was like meant to be, and worried that like, oh come on, like. Meanwhile, it's like pun intended, like had to like just lean into it. But again, that like, oh no, am I going to get in trouble for this? Or are we going to get in trouble for this? Is this a bad look? Are we being too cavalier? Meanwhile, I was like, the press release also went out at 4:20 p.m. because we probably took all day to put together and get approved. So like stuff like that, or I'm just trying to think of like other like lighthearted stuff. Like we physically moved the agency like 3 or 4 times in my first year there. We were renting like literally like the WeWork or Regis temporary office space because I just needed to put our CFO somewhere and like our government affairs guy somewhere and our HR department. Like, so all those things that are behind the scenes that are like lighthearted and sort of comical, we tend to gloss over, but those are the memories I hope that our staff maintain, as far as like, it was fun to work there. But I also hope I never, like someone asked me recently, like, would you do it again? And my answer was like, it's a sickness, but yeah, probably. Like if I, do I want to do it again right now? No. But I think it was enough. It's a once in a lifetime sort of experience or memory that, I'm grateful for, no doubt, but definitely the most stressful period of my life as well. So, and I took the bar exam. Like I went to law school at night, and this was the most stressful period of my life. So, have you ever has it ever gotten so bad that, like, sort of a loaded question, like impact on family and like bringing it home and that sort of thing too?
Yeah. The first time we tried to pass a rule for the medical program, going back to that again. Yeah. 100%, received death threats on social media. I had a pregnant wife and a 2-year-old at home, had the Portland PD driving by my house 8 times a day for about a month straight.
Yeah.
It was a lot, but I mean, tie in a lighthearted story to that, because I don't want to bring everybody down how bad it actually got. This was during COVID, so nobody was allowed at the State House during legislative session, but you could gather outside. So one random morning when they had session, I started getting texts at like 7, 8 o'clock in the morning from friends that still work there in the governor's office and the legislature. And they were like, hey, did you know there's a few hundred people here protesting you, Erik? This is, again, had to do with the medical rules. I'm like, what are you talking about? They're like, yeah, there's probably a couple hundred. And then I finally got a text message of a poster they had made um, of my face in
I've got it right here, actually.
Yeah, in a doctor's outfit that said, "I'm not a doctor, but I play one at OCP." Trying to say like, hey, this is a medical program. You're trying to regulate it more like an adult use program, whatever.
Yeah.
And
Doctor.
so I was like, oh my God. And I texted it to my mother naturally. And her first response was like, hey, at least they used a good picture of you. I was like,
you're finally a doctor. I'm so proud of you.
Yeah. Look at where, we can finally be proud. But yeah, it came home. It was tough. I mean, compounded on the fact that it was COVID and that was tough for everybody. And it was a really difficult time, but we crawled out of it. We doubled down on the conversations that we were having. I think they, at the end of the day, saw that we were trying to do it in good faith. And I made more of an effort to let them know, like, look, I'm not trying to ruin your industry. I understand the work that you do is incredibly important. Like, I just want to make sure that we're doing it. Again, going back to how can we make these two cannabis programs work best for the state of Maine? In my opinion, they still haven't gotten there, but it did get better, but it was a lot. I love my wife. Thank God. She was supportive through the whole thing, even though I know a lot of it came home with me in the evenings, on the weekends, completely stressed, pulling my hair out. I did have a lot of good support, close friends and confidants that I could, well, I shouldn't say a lot. I had like 2 that I called on a regular basis, but it was, I mean, when you bring it back to the human level, it was a time. It was a real thing. But even living through that experience, I agree with you, Shawn. Like, would you do it again? Yeah, absolutely. It was probably the best professional experience of my life. And I've had a lot of them. I worked in the legislature for 10 years. I worked in the golf industry. I did comedy. I started a cannabis. I started my own small business now. Like, I still think that was hands down the best experience for me, not just from a professional level, but on a human level, making me I think a better person, understanding who I am, and my strengths and weaknesses. So,
yeah, I think I would echo that sentiment. I think that's also really well said. I think it's also our experience up to that point, leading into that moment, like, prepared us, obviously. And I think ideally that experience we enjoyed will prepare us for whatever it is that comes next for us too. But I also think some of it lent, or for me at least selfishly, it was like the right time in my life as well. I was single. I could devote what was required at that point. And where I am in my life now, I don't think, if you said, like, as you sit here today, start it over, I don't think I have the capacity now. Like, I have too many other commitments. I have a family, but I think I can relate to the fact of, like, there were times that there was a police cruiser parked either in my driveway or at the top of my road.
That's crazy to think about, isn't it?
Seriously. And there were times where I would be traveling or like I would be in Boston and I didn't live in Boston, where I'm just not home, but my family is. And those were the moments that made me think, and those were the moments when I would get home that forced the conversation of, when does this end? When is this all over? And I think, much like you, I'm grateful that my wife is who she is and operates how she does, understands that for a period there was a pressure on our household, and she, I think, handled it with as much grace as anybody could, but also with as much patience as anybody could, until it just wore thin enough that it was, something has to give. And that's also one thing I keep in mind too. And I'm also really, it's helpful for me to sort of admit and I think appreciate, is that it also goes on, it moves on. So our programs have lived beyond us. And I think that's a testament to what was built there, that your program continues to hum along, that Massachusetts continues to hum along. And that's a testament to the staff that built those places from nothing, that they exist today, they function today, and that they continue to do their job, because all of this stuff needs to outlive all of us for it to be successful. And I think that's a testament to the work that you and I and our teams did. So,
And shout out to the spouses. Shout
Yeah.
out the spouses. She never asked me, when are you leaving? She knew when I took the job, I was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to be successful. I'm going to do the best job possible. And she, yeah, through thick and thin, she never was like, when are you leaving? She's like, you do you.
Yeah. I don't think my wife asked me when I was leaving. I think she might have told me when I was leaving.
Gentle,
I don't,
subtle like nudges like, hey.
you've met my wife.
Yes.
There's, yeah, subtle is, it's just a few less exclamation points maybe, but no, I think you're right. Like the support, none of this stuff would have been possible. And I think again, like the idea of when I took the job, she wasn't in my life, and she would never have discouraged it, but I think it would just would have been a different calculation altogether. But when you were doing your rules and regs in Maine, did you spend a lot of time, or did you give any consideration to things like buffer zones?
Occasionally.
Really?
We had,
So
yes, we had those meetings.
yeah, I think like I know in Massachusetts there's like cities and towns can come up with their own, right? Like they can settle a different buffer zone. They could add things perhaps, but state law mandated sort of a certain distance from things like schools and I don't know if you've caught the news recently. Also, I send out this pretty robust brief and newsletter every day. Link in bio. I've covered it the past couple, maybe feels like week at this point. Man, New York is going through some things. So
yeah, so New York is going through some stuff right now. And for listeners that don't know what we're talking about, I don't know how it came about or how it was caught or what it was, but Shawn's talking about these setbacks in law. These facilities need to be 500 feet away from schools, daycares, churches, what have you. And I guess the issue is the way that they measured it was incorrect. They were measuring front door to front door, property line to property line. I might have it backwards. It was one or the other, and it was basically the wrong measurement, to where now they have like 500 dispensaries that are improperly zoned or located against state law, which is which is a problem. And from like a camaraderie standpoint, because we've both been regulators, we've lived it. Like I feel so bad for them. Like
yeah,
I just want them to get a few wins under their belt. I feel like New York is just the gift that keeps on giving. But yeah, I mean that's a tough one. And the one issue that I really had with it was the solution they came out of the gates with was like, oh, we have these monies set aside to help people relocate, and they won't see any money coming out of their pocket in order to do so. But like, I don't know how that's the solution, especially if it was the state's fault. I mean, you're talking about people that have long-term leases. They've invested their livelihood in these places. They have regular customers or patients that come there. They're part of the community. If they're, hopefully they're doing things in the community for the betterment of the community. Like, it's not just, hey, let's find a new location. Like, it's way bigger than that. But I will say, I did read somewhere last week or the week before that they are working on a legislative fix to basically grandfather or just simply look the other way while they get that fix in there. But I mean, that's not a good situation for anybody involved right now.
Well, I think if our listeners are still with us, like you just heard you and I sort of debrief on some of the things that we lived through. And so as a result, I think there is a great deal of empathy and relatability to what the folks in New York are going through. But I also hope you understand that on the regulatory side, like that interaction between regulator and industry is one that should be engaging. It should be cooperative, productive. And I think part of it is understanding and just showing a degree of understanding of the implications of what that means for the business owner. And I think to illuminate a bit more, like the folks impacted some are just applicants that have been approved, and some are open and operational. So like you said, they're serving patients, they're serving customers, they are renting spaces from landlords, they had vendors that built out their spaces, they've designed these facilities, they have vaults, they have inventory, like all these things are technical and it's not as if you can just pick up and move one day. Like, these are really complicated operations, and between technology, security, and again, there's landlords that are renting spaces. They might be in a 10-year lease. They might be in a 15-year lease. They might have options to buy. They might own the property. And so all those things are just complicating factors. But it also goes to show, like, that's one area where sort of in with some sympathy toward the regulator here, the law is the law. And so how it was calculated and how that mattered, like, I didn't, before my time at the Cannabis Control Commission, I wasn't too familiar with phrases like "as the crow flies." But those are things that sort of come into play when you're dealing with distances from things. And so, like you said, there are some efforts underway to react statutorily to this provision that hopefully allows folks to resolve this issue in a way that is amenable and practical for every side of this. But I can certainly look at the situation, and I can see both sides of this, and certainly have a lot of compassion for everyone involved. That it's not a perfect situation; it is a mess. But hopefully, good intentions on both sides will allow it to be cleaned up with as least I don't know, like, invasion of operations and or like disturbance as possible.
Yeah,
So,
I think you and I both want this to work out for everybody.
yeah.
I think we're hopeful it will, because it is kind of a messy situation. But it goes back to what we were talking about earlier in trying to develop all of these different work streams. When you're talking about systems, licensing, tracking, applications, this is like part applications, part compliance. Like, the amount of detail that you need to go through and the complexity to make sure that you have that all right. You started saying, have you had these conversations? And yes, like, I remember having multiple conversations about this. Is it front door to front door? Is it property to property line? Let's bring in our legal counsel. Let's make sure we're doing this right. How are we actually going to measure it? Like, making sure that every single I is dot and T is crossed was so important, because as we've seen, in New York's been the prime example for this, these cannabis agencies are under a microscope. So one little miscalculation about how we're measuring these things is now, quite frankly, a really big issue.
And like, the implications are vast as far as like you said, they're dangling money, sure, but like, they're dangling millions, which I think speaks to the scope of this. But I remember having these conversations in Massachusetts a lot, and we had plenty of attorneys that disagreed with our interpretation on things, would then suggest changes to our regulations. As our staff would then consider those changes, they're talking to me about, like, this is how we're sort of going to manage this. It's within the buffer zone, distance, as the quote, as the crow flies, but there's, like, the Mass Turnpike goes right between them, or like, this interstate goes right between them. There's no practical way that someone's going to get there. No kid riding their bike to or from school is going to ever go by this building. And I'm like, sure, but we've also twisted ourselves into a regulatory pretzel to satisfy that one location, which means, like, on the licensing staff side, every time we get an application, we have to twist ourselves into that same pretzel to run that calculation. That is not a practical approach for us to take. As sympathetic as I am to this one perfect location, I can't set statewide policy based on the Mass Turnpike and where it intervenes on a side road.
Yep.
So those are things, again, plenty of empathy from our experience at our time there, but also I think we have to call it what it is, which is a complete, it sounds like a bit of a shit show. So,
yep.
Speaking of shit shows,
welcome to the hybrid.
Yeah, welcome back, everybody. Well, we had some other things on our list as far as, like, what's going on across the states. Sounds like Florida could be headed to a ballot again. One thing I think it's worth pointing out, and I think you and I have done this a little bit. I think even tried to put something in a publication at one point about it passed in Florida in the last election. It passed. Yes. It didn't meet some extremely high burden of plurality and it was 2/3 majority. It was like a 60% threshold versus a popularity. People in Florida, residents, citizens, voters, want adult use cannabis in Florida. They've spoken. It's government, between the administration, legislature, etc., that are skeptics, sure. But again, you put this thing on a ballot, it's going to pass.
Not in Florida.
But it passed.
Well, not in Florida.
It didn't fail.
Well, it failed. You're talking about
Semantics.
Semantics, the constitutional amendment in Florida, and it needs 60% of the vote, which is insanity. But yeah, so I guess my question to you is, like, I can understand like the advocates and the groups out collecting the signatures that want to make this happen. Uh, but I don't, what changes? Didn't it pass/fail like 55-45? Like, where are you going to get the additional five? Like, that's not
It failed. It failed past.
pass. But like, where are you going to get those other, I don't know what the math is, 700,000 votes? It's Florida. It's a big state. Like,
Well, I think if I'm not mistaken, politically, everyone's fleeing California and Massachusetts to Florida. So maybe that popularity,
there you go.
you know, be careful what you wish for, Florida. We might come and actually, we might start passing more shit down there.
Those
So
token liberal New Englanders.
next up, universal health care, folks. Hold on to your butts.
Oh my God. Yeah,
But no,
I'll be interested to see what happens.
I don't see another pathway, to be honest. So I think it's, you know, is the juice worth the squeeze? Maybe, because I don't see a viable pathway legislatively. And I think it's also worth keeping in mind from a Florida standpoint that, again, not I want to show due credence and respect to our colleagues on the regulatory side, but, you know, it's a medical program that is limited licensure, competitive process, and in that vein, you know, that some folks certainly have a stranglehold of the market as far as market dominance. So there's some pretty big operators down there. Also interesting politics, you know, the president having now as a Florida resident has certainly shared his perspective on the ballot question when he was a candidate for presidency. So what sway does that hold, especially the folks that are dominating that market there seem to have decent access to the administration and are trying to use that for national policy. Who knows if that translates into a state policy? And then also the moving pieces of a federal bureaucracy. You know, every time you see a cabinet position or something open up, you tend to hear the rumor mill, and folks from Florida are certainly on that list. So I think it's worth putting in the exercise to pursue the ballot question, if for nothing else, that, you know, who knows if on the, you know, drop of a dime, if the politics change dramatically in Florida. But yeah, plenty to watch across the states. I know I've seen, I was at the National Conference of State Legislatures this week, some discussion around hemp and intoxicating hemp and what states are doing there. So the policy world around cannabis continues to be an evolution and a moving target. Texas is in session right now on intoxicating hemp, and you know, I think ban seems to be the theme of the day, but I think you allowed me to jump on a soapbox on our last episode about that, so I'll just encourage folks to give it a listen. My position hasn't changed, if that's a curiosity. So
yeah, the Texas special session, I don't think the primary focus is hemp down there, but I guess that's part of it. Yeah.
Well, and ironically, it's funny, the focus of that session seems to be also an evolution, because it started as hemp after the governor's veto. Then it became the flooding, and responding to that, ensuring that there was adequate support, fundings, and sort of, you know, aid into that region. And now it's districts and redrawing those districts. And I just read this morning that the FBI is going to be looking for Democratic legislators across the country to summons them back to Texas. So just so they can vote on a ban on hemp, I think, is the focus. So
yeah, maybe. Yeah. Actually,
finally federal enforcement on marijuana policy. And safe banking. Anything new there you want to add? That, you know, any forecasts that?
Yeah, it's not going to happen. How about that?
Okay, all right, yeah.
Like, I have 10 years of hard data that says, listen, everybody's going to act like it's a thing, and then at the last minute, oh, guess what? Didn't make it in. What I think is more interesting, actually, yeah, I'm over the safe banking stuff, quite honestly, is the hemp loophole stuff. I know.
Yeah.
The
Ag Committee appropriations, yeah.
Yeah, like the House supported it, changing the definition to basically anything that's intoxicating is out, instead of the total THC calculation. But I just saw that the Senate took that out. So
yeah,
it's going to be interesting to see where they land on that, because I think people are like underestimating, like, if that was to go through, which I go back and forth on it. Again, I think it probably should, but like that upends a lot of things, particularly on the industry side. There's going to be sympathy there for some folks, not for all, but also on the state side. Like you have the states that have outright prohibited it, don't got to do much. Now you have states that are regulating it. All right. I would imagine at the end of the day, they're going to treat it much like adult use and medical cannabis. Like they're going to have their programs that's in conflict with federal law. Then you have a handful of states that kind of buried their head in the sand, haven't done much. They're going to be forced with a decision to make. Like what I think they're, depending on what happens there, it could shake things up pretty good.
So based on that is why, and I think, look, if you're betting on anything related to cannabis in Congress, I'll take the under on all of it, just across the board, that nothing happens. I do think the hemp piece is interesting for a number of reasons. There's a lot of layers to it. It's a Kentucky showdown between McConnell and Rand Paul, which again, it sort of how quickly things change. Rewind 5 years. If Mitch McConnell wants anything out of the U.S. Senate, it happens. Now, Rand Paul is like carrying more heavier water than McConnell is. I just think that's an interesting political dynamic. All the same, I think it's also like that's one state out of the entire United States that is potentially dictating, to your point, nationwide policy. That, and I think it's an interesting showdown, though, too, from a states' rights and federal dynamic, where states have actually passed laws regulating intoxicating hemp, and now the feds may step in and say, whoops, didn't mean it that way. And what does that do to those laws? And now there's a bit of those, obviously, being an attorney, I get the sense that the federal law does supersede. All the same, it's just curious, like, can you put that toothpaste back in? And I look at the dynamic or the politics of that to basically be an invitation from Congress to say to the industry, like, prove your responsibility, prove your maturity, and you can keep your drinks. Otherwise, I think the threat is there, no doubt. And I mean, it passed unanimously in committee. Like, that's got to be, if there's warning signs, that's where they are. I think it's more of an invitation to smarten up politically, come visit us, and start playing the game. I think you're also looking at the layers of industry there, where you've got the alcohol industry around this issue pretty intense. And if there's anything the alcohol industry has demonstrated over the past 100 years, it's political power. So again, a lot to watch, so many layers to this. But if you gun to my head, Congress doing nothing is the safest bet. That the House, I would win against the House every time on that. So
I know
the House being a casino, not the House of Representatives.
Yeah, I got that. I got that. Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I would agree with you, but for some reason, this one just kind of rubs me the wrong way. And I shouldn't say rubs me the wrong way, but I have a sneaking suspicion, and maybe it's just misplaced, that this actually does pass, and then it's going to be like, all right, let's figure it out.
Or does it pass the Senate and not the House? Like, and what does Trump do? Like, there's so many, Anyway, I think what I'm also seeing is, as I deal with states across the country on this issue, it's almost hit pause on some consideration too, of like, we were moving a bill, we were moving a law, now we're going to wait to see what the feds do. And so it kind of grinds things to a halt. What it doesn't do is solve things like rescheduling, which, like, that's a moving target. And like, if you read Twitter, it's going to happen today or yesterday or tomorrow or the next day. And Mike Tyson met with Montel, who met with RFK, who met with like somebody. And again, rewind 15 years and someone talked to Dr. Oz, and all of a sudden there's going to be federal policy based on that. And it's like, what movie is this? It's like straight to DVD, I think. So
what world do we live in?
Yeah. But it's the world we chose for some reason. But based on that, again, I think I can appreciate the pressures that a lot of these businesses find themselves in. And that also goes to speak to some of the news we're seeing too around the country, where some of the businesses that, again, 5 years ago were like the golden goose, are some of those debt notes, and investors are getting a little antsy, and that money's coming home to roost and it's coming due. And you're starting to see some folks consolidate, wind down operations. And it's like, how long can some of these businesses hold on? Because they're leveraged. They're leveraged to the max. They need capital access. They need to restructure some of that debt. And, growing into 9, 10, 12 markets made a lot of sense when it was a trajectory. And keep in mind, especially from an economic standpoint, you're building, being in 9, 10, 12 states doesn't mean you're having one central supply that you're shipping from. You're building 9, 10, 11, 12 individual supply chains, and there's no scale to that. And I think that's what you're seeing the pressures on. Like from a financial pressure standpoint, it's not for lack of market interest. It's not for lack of consumer interest. It's the pressures of building. You have no central location.
Yeah.
You have no Northeast hub. You have a state-based supply chain.
This is what I was talking about. It's an
Sorry,
agricultural.
I wasn't paying attention.
It's an agricultural commodity. Like the economics of this don't work.
Yep. So with that in mind, speaking of things that don't work, trivia.
Why doesn't trivia work?
Well, your trivia doesn't work.
Oh yeah. Well, let's do trivia. I don't know why Shawn gives me such a hard time here. I forgot to get a question once. One time I brought a question that was laughable. But I did come prepared. I did bring a question. It's a very easy question, cause I want you to feel good about yourself, on these podcasts and keep you in high spirits here. So very easy.
Okay.
What cannabinoid found in the
Jesus
cannabis
Christ.
plant is most associated with anti-inflammatory effects?
I mean, my gut says CBD, but is that a trick question? I mean, CBG is the mother of all cannabinoids, so I could get away with a loophole here.
Are you looking at me because you want me to give you the answer?
No, I'm sorry. I thought this was production value. I thought we were supposed to look at the camera. I'm gonna go CBD. Final answer.
Yeah, of course it's CBD. You got it.
I don't love my question.
I don't know what to tell you about that.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
don't think I've loved any of the questions I ever brought to you, but here we are.
This one I'm off the top of my head just because I think it's sort of comical and it's going to give me a soapbox. The state of Washington commissioned a study to identify things that were appealing to children in order to prepare for their implementation around avoiding things that were appealing to children. What color was found to be most appealing to children in that study by Washington State University?
What color?
Yep. And don't say bright.
Neon.
Bright colors. All of them.
I will go. I want to say pink, but that's little girls, and I want to say blue, but that's little boys. So what's like a combo?
Whoa.
If you were to take pink and mix it,
we're
with
gonna get some emails on that comment right
blue,
there.
you know what? It will be fine. Listen, I have 2 kids. Guess what? My son's favorite color is blue, and pink is my daughter's favorite color.
So speak for yourself.
So before you say, Erik, if you take blue and pink and you mix it together, it doesn't make that color. I know that for a fact. I'm going to go, I'm going to go red.
Red's the answer. Red is the answer. And obviously also later in there was bright and neon, but red was the color that was appealing to children.
Do you like how I went through that process? I was like, all right, if you have pink and blue and you mix it together, that's going to be the color. And then I went with a color that wasn't those things.
What do you get with pink and blue? It's like barf.
Yeah, I don't know. That's what led me to what color is in the middle. It's red. So the process actually did work.
There's logic there. We didn't need to witness the logic, but thank you for sharing it.
I wanted to bring you along for the ride.
But that is my takeaway from there is I could have probably told you that. Erik just proved, frankly,
that I'm a child and I like red.
But also, like, the human nature and the logic that goes into, like, what is appealing to kids, I can only imagine two things. How long it took to study that and how much it cost to study that.
That's right.
And if you ever wonder, like, where the money goes in some of these programs, it's to determine that the color red is appealing to kids.
So what Shawn's saying is just give that money to the hybrid. We'll have you on.
Seriously,
We'll work through these things together.
Today's episode brought to you by Washington State University. Online master's programs available. Yeah, but that's, again, also some of the things that we deal with as regulators. That's a good illustration of the time we spend. I think you and I probably just spent more time on that topic than you and I spent on the phone about, can you use our universal symbols? Again, just because it took a while, could be because it was a mental gymnastics exercise that we had to go through. But look, I think we covered our territory. We're pretty well into this episode too, which is, I was nervous we wouldn't have enough content, and sure enough, you and I chatting. We can fill a room.
We hadn't done one for a while, so I'm glad we got back to have our little chats. And
good check-in.
I think the next episode we're doing recording is in a couple weeks. We will have a guest. We will have a guest again.
Excited about that one.
So it should be another conversation. So if you're listening, as Shawn likes to say, like and subscribe, and we'll be back in a few weeks with a new guest, new topics, new conversation. We'll post it up here. We'll post it over there.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to the next episode. Thank you for suggesting we get this one under our belts. It was good to get back in the saddle. Also, if you are interested in being a guest or seeing us cover a topic, we'd love to take your suggestions. There is an actual link in our bio, at least on Instagram. We try to post some clips so people can maybe get a moose boosh for what might come into the episode next. But yeah, ultimately, look, this is a podcast we want to have some fun with. We want to cover some substance, but the other objective is to try to make this stuff a bit more approachable. And we hope we've succeeded in that. We hope we can peel the curtain back a little bit, let you see the inside and what goes on behind the scenes as regulators, as now recovering regulators. But as Erik said, we're going to be back pretty soon with another episode and hopefully an exciting guest. And until then, I guess good luck up there. We're all counting on you.
We'll get them.
See you, everybody.
The hybrid. Yeah. The hybrid.